Anesthesia, the greatest mystery of medicine. In one of our previous videos, we asked a question: where does consciousness go? But behind that question lies an even deeper mystery. How did it even become possible to turn human consciousness off and on? Until the mid-19th century, surgery was synonymous with torture. Operations had to be done quickly, and patients were held down by force. And then a miracle happened. Ether. Today, we're not just returning to the mystery of anesthesia. We'll explore how it was born and why, almost 2 centuries later, anesthesiology remains one of the greatest enigmas in all of medicine. We'll uncover how doctors discovered the sleeping gas and why it sparked the ether wars. The paradox of disconnection, why the most popular theories turned out to be wrong, and why anesthesia doesn't work for everyone. The mystery of genetic resistance, and the most terrifying scenario: intraoperative awareness. The disappearance of consciousness. Sometimes medicine makes discoveries that look like magic. You fall asleep, and the world disappears. No dreams, no thoughts, no pain. And then, your eyes open again, as if nothing ever happened. But where were you? Where does consciousness go under anesthesia? And why does it return? This is one of the strangest mysteries in all of science. We can turn consciousness off with the press of a button, but we still don't know what exactly we're turning off. Chapter 1. Before ether, surgery as torture. Until the mid-19th century, surgery meant one thing: pain. Surgeons competed in speed, amputations in 90 seconds, screams, the smell of blood. Patients were held down by force. Some died from shock before the surgeon even finished. No one imagined that an artificial sleep could be induced. Pain was seen as part of healing, a trial of the spirit. And then, everything changed. Chapter 2. Ether and the Dawn of a New Era. In 1846 in Boston, a dentist named William Morton performed a demonstration. The patient inhaled ether vapors and fell asleep. The surgeon removed a tumor without a single scream. The audience was stunned. That day entered history as the birth of anesthesia. But almost immediately began the ether war. Dozens of doctors arguing over who had discovered the miracle sleep first: Crawford, Jackson, Wells. Disputes over who deserves credit for the discovery continued for decades. Chapter 3. The Great Mystery of Disconnection. Nearly 2 centuries have passed, and we still don't truly understand how anesthesia works. There are dozens of theories: electrical, molecular, even quantum. But none of them explain everything. It was once believed that anesthesia simply freezes the brain. But the EEG shows the opposite. The anesthetized brain is not asleep. It's active. It reorganizes its connections, as if entering a special state, where perception and the self become separated. A person doesn't just lose consciousness. They lose the observer itself. Chapter 4. The Molecular Paradox. All modern anesthetics, from ether to propofol, act on tiny proteins embedded in the membranes of neurons. But here's the strange part. Different substances, with completely different chemistry, produce the same result: loss of consciousness. That contradicts classical pharmacology. Why do substances with different molecular structures turn off the same phenomenon? Subjective experience. Some scientists, like Stuart Hameroff and Roger Penrose, suggest that anesthesia acts not on synapses, but on quantum processes inside neurons. The molecules of anesthetics seem to disrupt the delicate coherence in which consciousness itself arises. Others, more skeptical, say, we just don't yet know where to look. Chapter 5. When anesthesia fails. Every anesthesiologist knows there are people who simply cannot be fully put to sleep. Intraoperative awareness, rare but terrifying. The patient is paralyzed, unable to move, but conscious that the surgery continues. They can hear, they can feel, they can remember. Statistics say 1 case in every 15 to 20,000, but each one leaves a scar for life. Scientists link it to genetic variations in how the body metabolizes anesthetics and to the resistance of certain neural receptors. In other words, not everyone can be switched off the same way, which means the mechanism of anesthesia isn't universal. It depends on the very nature of consciousness, and perhaps on what makes it unique in each of us. Chapter 6. The Neural Network of Sleep and Silence. Neurophysiologists now know anesthesia doesn't simply turn off the brain, it breaks its integration, the connection between frontal, parietal, and limbic regions. Consciousness disappears when the brain stops being a network, when signals no longer form a coherent picture of the world. You could say that anesthesia is artificial decoherence of consciousness. The brain keeps working, but can no longer see itself. What experiments really show? When scientists say consciousness disappears when the brain stops being a network, they're describing a correlation, not a cause. That is, every time a person loses consciousness, whether in sleep, anesthesia, or coma, we see that. The synchrony between brain regions collapses, information exchange becomes fragmented, and the global workspace literally falls apart. But this doesn't prove that consciousness is created by the network. It only proves that the network is needed for consciousness to manifest, just as a receiver is needed for a radio signal to be heard. The radio analogy. Imagine a radio. If you break the antenna, the sound disappears. If you remove the speaker, silence again. But that doesn't mean the radio station stopped broadcasting. Consciousness is like a signal, and the brain is a biological receiver that decodes that signal into thoughts, images, and sensations. When anesthesia breaks integration, the brain simply loses the ability to receive that signal as a single, coherent wave. It stops being a coherent system, and the broadcast cuts off. 2 competing interpretations in science. 1. Reductionist, materialist view. Consciousness is the result of neural synchronization. When that synchronization breaks, consciousness disappears. Consciousness, a function of the brain. This is what most neuroscientists believe. 2. Integrative field, panpsychic, non-physicalist view. Consciousness is not produced by the brain, but is a universal field of perception. The brain is a biological instrument that tunes into this field. When the connections between regions collapse, the brain loses its tuning. Consciousness doesn't vanish. It simply stops reflecting through the brain. The example: neural correlates of consciousness. All neuroscience can prove today are neural correlates, the brain states in which consciousness is present and those in which it is absent, but not why it appears at all. It's like a shadow. You can measure where and when it appears, but the shadow is not the source of the light. What happens under anesthesia? When a person falls asleep under anesthesia, the brain keeps working, but not as a unified whole. The global workspace, the integration network of perception, collapses, and perhaps the transmission from the field of consciousness to the brain is interrupted. In the end, consciousness is not in the brain, but the brain is needed for it to manifest. Anesthesia doesn't kill consciousness. It only disconnects the biological interface that makes consciousness accessible to experience. Chapter 7. Anesthesia as a window into the nature of consciousness. Every time an anesthesiologist presses the button, he performs what philosophers have tried to understand for centuries: an artificial separation of being and perception. Anesthesia has become not only a medical tool, but also a model for understanding consciousness itself. It reveals something subtle. Consciousness doesn't disappear completely. It simply ceases to be accessible to itself. Perhaps what we call loss of consciousness is really the loss of the point of observation. Maybe under anesthesia, the brain continues to be, but without the one who knows that it is. Finale, the quietest place in the universe. Under anesthesia, a person disappears, but does not die. Consciousness switches off, but returns to the same place where it was. And this return remains the greatest mystery of medicine. Maybe we don't really turn off consciousness. We send it somewhere it has always been, into the silence between impulses, into the pause between thoughts, into that very point where the I stops being separate.